Have you ever noticed the strange marks that German tanks had on their barrels? Generally, as with the C-Medit, these marks are quite difficult to see due to the quality of the videos we have from that time. Therefore, these marks are not very well known, however, it was a fairly common practice. Even people who know these marks often get confused about their origin and the reason for this practice. Today, in this video, we will talk about the history, the origin, and why the Germans made these strange marks on their cannons. In the early stages of World War II, the German armored divisions had a devastating success over their enemies, not necessarily for having the best tanks, but for the good use that the German generals made of these. In the Battle of France, the German armored units would face English and French tanks on relatively equal terms, manifesting in the largest tank battles in history. Up until that point, the best French tank during the conflict was the Saumur S-35, and it was generally very good and could give battle to the panzers. But by the time Germany would start the invasion, there were 500 of these, and they were very little present on the front. Most of these would be captured by Germany to be later used on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, apart from the S-35. There weren't many tank models that could rival the German tanks, and these German tanks inflicted a large number of casualties. The successful campaign over Western Europe resulted in many German tanks and cannons with high casualties, some with a number of casualties exceeding 10. Armored enemies, the Germans were very proud of the casualties they inflicted on the enemy. Therefore, the ritual of marking casualties on the barrels of tanks began to popularize. This practice was not something new at all. Aviators had been doing this since World War I. In the Allied armies, the famous victory marks were painted. Normally, these marks were painted on the side of the planes, and for each enemy casualty, a flag corresponding to the enemy was painted. So the beams could have many flags painted on the sides of their planes, even dozens. An example of these marks would be the P-51 of Mustang, from Lieutenant Lois Edward Curtis, who is one of the few pilots who shot down enemy planes in all the Second World War scenarios where the United States participated. At his home, he displayed 7 German flags, an Italian and a Japanese one, also, finally, an American one, since Curtis shot down an American C-47 Skytrain transport plane, and he did it deliberately to be able to save his companions. Marks were also made referring to the successful missions that had been carried out on the plane, which were generally done by the bombers. And there was a whole symbolism behind these symbols. Like there were planes carrying umbrellas, which meant that this plane had survived a cover mission, or also those carrying brooms were planes that had survived sweep missions. However, during the early stages of World War II, it was the first time this practice was extrapolated to tanks or anti-tank guns. In the case of the Germans, these marks did not have a particular name, but they are generally known as kill rings or also as victory marks. The Germans were very proud of the marks on their guns. Therefore, they showed them to their less experienced comrades with all pride, and it was a real symbol of their worth in combat. The commanders were certainly very much in favor of this practice, as it boosted the morale of the crews and made them feel more confident in their abilities. And most importantly, it added a competitive edge to the work, making the crews compete to see who could inflict the most casualties on the enemy. All of this resulted in a greater number of armored enemies defeated. Although there are also stories of commanders who ordered these marks to be removed because they simply thought they were nonsense, or in other cases, there were commanders who ordered them to be painted only on top of the tank or in less visible places, so as not to reveal any information about tanks with more experienced crews. So, even though it was a generally accepted practice, each commander or gunner decided whether or not to do it. To register a mark on a cannon, only a confirmed tank kill could be counted. Therefore, they did not count casualties to infantry or light vehicles, nor to fixed anti-tank guns. Although it was such a widespread practice that the crews marked anything at their discretion. So there was not such a fixed nomenclature as in the case of those used by aviators. Normally, to record a casualty, simply a mark was made around the barrel, making a ring, alluding to a defeated tank. But thick marks were also made next to a certain number of defeated enemies. There were also marks that did not surround the barrel, but many times were just a simple line with a tank symbol on one side. The anti-aircraft guns would also have these marks, but they were more predominant on the anti-tank guns, like the popular Flak 88. For example, in this image we can see an anti-tank flak gun with about 40 marks. Being quite outrageous, it would be a bit crazy to think that this gun defeated 40 tanks, and it's most likely that the gunners considered marking light vehicles. However, although it is uncommon, it would be possible these marks would be uncommon in other armies. However, the Allies would also use them. For example, here we have a Sherman Firefly from the Canadian Army with camouflage paint, where we can see marks similar to those used by Germany. Here we have, for example, an American tank in the Pacific with 6 marks of Japanese flags, exactly as an aviator would do, but specifically marking the type of enemy it defeated. As we can see, it defeated 5 tanks and perhaps an anti-tank gun. The Soviets also made marks on their tanks, as we can see in this photo. Although I have not been able to find an explanation of what they meant, if you know, you can comment. Generally, in the Allied armies, it seems that yes, marks were certainly painted to count enemy casualties, but not at all as standardized as in American and German aviation or in German tanks, so we will see many different marks on Allied tanks. Currently, this practice is carried out in modern armies in very different ways, but being the same concept. For example, we can see it in bombing and ground attack planes, also in the M1 Abrams of the Gulf War, with marks indicating the number of tanks defeated, and many of these also had the model of the defeated tank painted on the corresponding mark. This tank defeated 5 enemies, 2 T-62S, 2 T-72s, and 1 ZPU anti-aircraft gun. Additionally, very recently, Ukrainian T-80 tanks have been spotted, which also carry marks very similar to those used by Germany. Perhaps the Ukrainians want to keep this tradition alive. Without a doubt, it's quite strange that people usually don't know this common detail about World War II tanks. The problem may be the video's quality from that period. As usual with Chimerit, unable to view tanks closely in good quality. We had never been able to detail these small but important details. Did you know about the existence of these marks? And if that's the case, tell me what you think of them in the comments. Thank you very much for watching this video. And I would like to let you know that if it's within your means, you might consider becoming a member of this channel and support this channel in a more direct way. If not, please consider subscribing and liking. Thank you for watching and see you next time.